G'day, it's your old mate Matthew here. Welcome to the Yarnsman podcast. In this episode, we have a good yarn with Chris Boyle, and we talk about him recreating the great race from 1907, which was from Beijing to Paris, 15,000 kilometre race. Really interesting for a number of reasons. The physical and emotional impact of embarking on big adventures, where you get to see the best and worst of the world and society. The thing with guys is, well, actually all people, is we need a challenge. However, we don't always appreciate how that challenge and the adventure might impact us afterwards. A couple of other interesting points was, how Chris talks about writing down the great things you've done in your life and to be grateful for those. And also to make sure you have the next adventure mapped out to keep the positive drag going. Well, I hope you enjoy the yarn as much as I did. Hello and welcome to the Yarnsman podcast. Today we have Chris Boyle on. Chris is an entrepreneur, adventurer, philosopher, advisor. He's also a husband and father and a regular Yarnsman. How are you, Chris?
Fantastic. Thanks, Matthew. Good morning to you.
Yeah, thanks for coming on board. We'll jump into it. What have you struggled with in the last week?
Well, challenges of business. It's a tough market, so just trying to stay positive about it's possible, which is that daily grind of bouncing out of bed, and probably also just that enduring one where you come face to face with, am I actually achieving what I wanted to achieve? Horrible question to ask, because I don't know if there's ever really a satisfactory answer to it. But the action from it is trying to be grateful.
Yeah, I like that. That's the art of being grateful. That's something we try and practice on a daily basis. More of an art than a science, though, right?
Yeah. I've taken to the practice of writing down the things I've done in my life, the great things, because I think it's pretty damn easy to forget and only focus on those things that are challenging.
And you've done some pretty cool things, of which we'll get into one of them very shortly. What do you want to work on in the next week?
Being more present in the challenge. So I think it's easy just to push things down the line a wee bit, but just like everything in life, if you take it head on now and get it done, then you remove it from the brain space of constant thinking. So for the next week, there's a couple of just challenges I've got to deal with around, again, work, and just getting really clear on those, getting a plan in place.
Being comfortable in the discomfort of getting those hard things done, right?
Well, it's that classic thing you constantly hear is humans were designed to be in discomfort. That's what creates movement, change, ambition, etc. So don't complain about being uncomfortable, just grab it and run with it.
What are you proud of?
Oh, look, a pile of things. But if I was being real about it, I'm pretty proud of my family. Well, I'm not pretty proud. I'm very proud of my family. I've got an amazing wife that just has this incredible capacity to just keep doing. And three young adult daughters that just on a daily basis amaze me and give me a real sense of pride of what's possible.
Nice. It's good to have. What gives you hope?
Oh, look, there was a LinkedIn post on one of our projects that we're doing, and there's always a naysayer in it that jumps in there and fires up a post about, rah, rah, rah. I think it's grumpy old man syndrome. But it's, the bit is you'll read 17 really good supportive comments, and then you'll just have this outlier that's just a muppet. And and you just have to go, I'm not going to focus on that. It's less than 5% of the response. So don't let that one dominate the good work. So just stay focused, stay positive.
I like that. Now, we're going to jump into one of your many great adventurous yarns. The reenactment of the great race from, well, I'm going to call it Beijing to Paris. Where do you want to start on that yarn?
The phone call from a mate in Australia that rung up and said, "Hey, look, you're going to get a call any moment from News Limited. You need to be available for 3 months. You need to be happy to live in a tent, and you got to work on old cars, but just say yes." That's where it started. So then, within a day, a phone call came through, and it was an old sponsor of mine, actually, that when I was racing superbikes in Australia. And the question was, "Hey, do you want to do this event? We're reenacting the great race of 1907. Do you want to come along and co-ride one of the vehicles?" Which was actually a 3-wheeled, 100-year-old French motorcycle called a Contail. So that was a starting point. That was about February 2005, and within 60 odd days, I was on a plane flying up to Beijing to start this adventure, which was confronting and life-changing.
So, and how many of you were doing it together? You say 4 or 5?
So it was they got together the 5 original vehicles. So it ended up being an event that was covered by ABC Australia. They did a 4-part documentary, and in 1905 or 1904, it was Le Matin, which was a French newspaper, threw out this challenge: will anyone this summer take an automobile from Paris to Peking? And the background to that was the automobile was in its early stages of emerging, and the French were leading that industry at that stage. And it was being treated as a fad, something that would never catch on. The horse and cart was there to stay. So they were destined to try and prove that automobiles could be reliable and you could traverse this distance. So they threw that ad out. 5 groups responded in earnest. They changed the direction of the event, and it basically became a trip of some 10,000 kilometers from Peking, which is the old city, which is now Beijing, through to Paris. So the event happened with some really interesting outcomes, but this group for the reenactment got the 5 original vehicles. One was a replica, but it was an Itala, which is an Italian car. Doesn't take much to guess that link. 2 Didion Boutons, which were little French cars, about 6 horsepower each. The Contail 3-wheeled motorbike that I mentioned earlier, and of course a Spiker, which was a Dutch car of great heritage now. When you look at a Spiker supercar, they're quite a phenomenal vehicle, but this was one of their original vehicles. So that was the event. They wanted to reenact it with all the various storylines that went with it. I was on the Contail, co-riding that with a good friend and a sponsor from earlier days, Mick Matheson, who's a journalist. His father, who's a brain surgeon, was driving one of the Didion Boutons. We had a chap out of the Netherlands driving a Spiker. We had an Australian adventurer, Lang Kidby, in the Italia. He was co-driven by one of the cartoonists from News Limited, actually. So somehow News Limited got him behind it. It's actually the 20-year anniversary of it in Sydney in about 4 weeks' time, which is quite exciting. But that was the event. So here we all rocked up into Beijing. First thing was trying to get cars out of importation. Interesting, the bribes that have to be done in that country to actually get things to happen. So there was one point where we thought we're actually not going to have any vehicles. But the second part about that was actually the Spiker was a bit late to arrive, so it was FedExed from Holland. It turned up in a plane, plastic wrapped, which was incredible. So that was the background of the event. I got asked along because of probably someone thought I was capable of roughing it and also keeping old vehicles running. So I came along as a co-driver and a spanner man, and there we all gathered in Beijing in early May 2005 and set off on this intrepid adventure, reenacting every part of the original race, so that it could be videoed and done as a comparison to the records from 1905. So a good adventure.
Before we got on, you were talking about the attire. You had to match the outfit as well. Tell us about that?
Oh, it was classic. So they wanted us looking as traditional as possible. So R.M. Williams rolled in and sponsored all the clothing. So, moleskin pants, cotton shirts, oilskin, wet weather gear, high boots, bloody good gear. I've still got some of it today. It's living on strong. Got 2 sets. Actually, we got 3 sets. Had to keep 1 set for absolute good because there was a ball at Pouton's Castle in St. Petersburg late in the event. Probably shouldn't talk about that in this current environment, but that was part of the original event as well. But, living in 2 sets of this stuff, and you're exposed to the weather, and most of the roads weren't really roads. They were pretty rough tracks. So you ended up getting pretty grimy, which, interesting enough, gave you huge credibility in Russia, because if you're too tidy there, then you're not considered to be a worker. Yeah, if you're bloody messy and look as though you've been dragged backwards through a ditch, then you're considered to be one strong contributor. So these things got pretty manky. Great gear, lasted well. And it would always amaze me what the babushkas in these Russian hotels could do with dirty clothing in terms of the cleaning they'd do. So, but great gear. So a lot of the photos in that were taken with this bunch of scraggly looking dudes that you could imagine were from 1905, but instead 1907, but instead it was 2000 and 2005.
Well, good advert for R.M. Williams as well here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, look, it was good gear. They did us well, and you didn't have a single issue.
Yeah, I mean, going across all those countries in that short space of time, you must have seen a lot of stuff and had some high highs and low lows.
Yeah, it was an incredible adventure, but you probably came out of it with the deficit of sleep, emotion, and a number of other things. We came out of the old city of Peking. We went up the steppe, which is basically comes out of China up into Mongolia. We crossed the Gobi Desert. We then crossed Siberia through Russia, out through Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, the Netherlands, Belgium, France, Germany and France. And you just saw this absolute contrast of existence, especially out in Siberia. That's communism failed in Russia years prior to this, and a lot of the state farms were no longer operational. They've been taken over by some of the nouveau Ruskies, the new rich Russians. A lot of people out of work, infrastructure not working, a lot of poverty, which creates certain behaviours right through to Moscow, where you've just got this absolute gluttony of wealth and prosperity by some. So some real contrasts, some incredible experiences. I can recount ending up in a barnya. I'd broken my back at one stage just out of a kutz. So I spent 5 days lying flat in the back of a support van on some good medication, but a small village found out my plight and organised a barnya. So first they fed us, and you have to realise food is pretty minimal. So giving up food, and then a barnya, which is effectively a sauna, very hot room, and they beat you with birch leaves to get the blood flowing, etc. So there were some interesting moments. There's more to that story, but
yeah. Yeah, I was. I
Compromising
mean,
positions with cameramen.
oh right, yeah. Well, I mean, I've had a Haman in Morocco. I'm sure it's probably something like that, but a bit more raw.
Yeah, yeah. It was classic. So you go from that, and then we had right through the other end where we had the reenactment of the ball that Benghazi attended, who was in the first car, the Itala. He was so far ahead of the pack during the actual race that he diverted up to St. Petersburg to go to a ball in the palace, the presidential palace. So we did the same. It was put on by the Russian Vintage Car Club, and so there we are in this absolute fine dining, elaborate place, drinking the best of wines, etc. And it was just such a far reach from less than 3 weeks earlier in the middle of the Tigray in Siberia, just seeing people selling copper pots on the side of the road because they worked for a business that made copper pots and they got paid in the product. So during their downtime, they tried to sell the product on the side of the road to get an income. So just, yeah, some real contrasts of people living in that. And that's probably, they probably created some of the highs, but equally created some of the lows. We had a couple of moments on the trip where an accident. One of our fixers had a head-on one morning, which was pretty serious. You saw things that weren't necessarily glamorous. You got to, through France, we went to Verdun, saw the home of the forgotten soldier, 250 odd thousand unnamed bodies from two wars are there. So you got this. It was a really interesting event where you got to see humanity at its best and its worst, but you also got to see the history of it. So all the way through Siberia, you saw evidence of the gulags and Stalin's reign and, mass cemeteries where whole families were wiped out. But then you saw people just creating a living out of nothing, which was just this absolute determination. So incredible presentation of humanity's best and worst. And then, of course, how bloody grotesque men can be to each other through various wars. So a real melting pot of emotions emerged from that. So that was happening at that real macro level around us. And then at a micro level, we had our own little dramas within the group. So you had 5 vehicles with sort of 2 people per vehicle of all backgrounds, and then some support people, and then the ABC crew. And you just got some absolutely compassionate behaviors and some absolutely heinous behaviors. Yeah. So it was a melting pot and pressure cooker of existence.
Yeah, I bet. Well,
yeah.
Talk through how you broke your back.
We'd come out of we were crossing the border from Mongolia into Russia, and the Mongolians, incredible people, just smile constantly and just were phenomenal to be around. And they sort of pushed us through their side of the land. I've forgotten it. Control point. Leaving Mongolia, and you go through no man's land, which is about 200, 300 meters wide, and then you go through the control gate to get into Russia. And they saw us coming and decided to go to lunch. So we got locked in no man's land for several hours where we couldn't move. So what do you do? And there's a bunch of Australians and Kiwis, etc. Obviously not other nationalities, but we decided to play cricket, which was not good. I don't think any of us actually knew how to do it. But we did that, and then we finally got through into the gates into Russia. But we were late and didn't make it to Irkutsk that night, so we pulled up into a little village. And long story short, cars got impounded, which was to protect them from being stolen. We ended up having a little bit of a event with local mafia that night, which happens when people turn up into their town. And the following day, we were hightailing it out of there, and we broke a spring on the front of the contail. So it's 2 wheels at the front normally has a bread basket there, but it had been replaced with a seat. and then the rider sits at the back with these long cow horn handlebars. And one of the springs broke, bike veered off the road. I was riding it at the time in a little village on the edge of Lake Bacau, and a local chap come along, signed to me that with his finger and his thumb that he could weld it. So I pushed the bike, followed him to his home. He welded the thing up whilst feeding me dried fish. So that was great, but it was a temporary fix. When we got into Akuts, the people saw us come in and they heard of this problem. So we ended up the next morning down in the hospital in the maintenance yard. And this chap, I'm sure had about a gallon of vodka there for his morning sustenance, had a full forge blacksmith operation, and he handmade a set of springs for us, leaf springs. Incredible. No tape measure used, just eye measurements, and fabricated it beautifully, but wouldn't let us touch it. So him and his cohorts bolted this thing up, and what they did is the bolts through the eyelets and that let the springs move, they did solid. So it basically locked the whole suspension up rigid. We jumped on the bike to ride out. Mick was in the driver's seat. I was up in the front basket, and I was leaning over the back, which has a metal rail, giving him info because we were being filmed at the time, and we're mic'd up, and I'm saying to him, look, we're going to go out here. We're going to go left, try and look glamorous. And as I was leaned over talking to him, we went over this really abrupt judder bar, which the security fence ran on the gate. And I got flicked up in the air, and when I came down, I landed across this metal bar. And the guys in the van in front of us with the cameras and the mic gear heard it crack. So I just did a bit of rearrangement of a couple of vertebrae, which was painful. But we had to, because they wanted continuity with the filming, I had to travelled in the van, lying flat on the deck, with some good medication on board. But every time they needed to film something, I'd have to jump out and climb in the front of this bloody bike and pretend everything was okay.
What did they do? Wrap you up with a splint in the back?
No, it was more like give him enough drugs and he'll pretend he's okay. So it sort of worked, but it made the next week pretty damn difficult. And then the group sort of had a little bit of a splintering moment. The leadership wasn't so great. A couple of the strong-minded ones had a view on that, so the group disbanded for a few days, and Mick and I, that were pretty free-spirited, both bike riders, etc., got a little bit despondent about this, so we thought, bugger it, we'll go our own way. So we jumped up on a parallel sort of dirt road and drove through some villages with the film crew following us, and that's when I ended up in that barnyard. Trying to get the treatment from a chap with no teeth. Well, they were all stainless steel. He'd made his own teeth actually and had them fitted. So it was pretty impressive. But that's how I broke my back. Dealt with it. Looked at different things of what we could do, and actually after about 10 days of a bit of rest during the day, it sort of came right, and we carried on. Yeah.
I mean, that's fairly crazy, right? Yeah, just get in the back of the van, you'll be right in a few days, right? Having crashed the Yansmobile myself, I know that's probably not going to be the case here. So really interesting. I wanted to find out a bit more about post trip and how you let's come back to reality. How was that experience for you?
It was an experience. Probably don't want to label it too much. We finished under the Eiffel Tower in Paris, met by the Australian ambassador, because it was predominantly a News Limited Australia central process event, and a chap out of Holland had turned up with boxes of Moet that he shared with us all, and And we were sponsored by a very six-star hotel chain. So we were put up for a week in Paris in this incredible hotel. And it was, you've gone from China, which whenever you thought you were on your own and you stopped somewhere, a head would pop up. There's just people everywhere, and you're monitored the whole time by the army because you've got camera gear, etc. So you had that. Then you had Gobi, the Gobi Desert through Mongolia, which is just empty except for the horsemen and the people tending to herds, etc., who were just incredible. Russia, Siberia, hardship, poverty. Western side of Russia, absolute wealth. Then back into poverty in Latvia, Lithuania, and then through Poland, through the Wolf's Lair, Hitler's hideout. We went through, had a look at that, and then the battlefields through France, etc. So you just had this roller coaster of emotions, and then you end up in this bloody six-star hotel for a week drinking Moet and in Paris, and then you get on a plane and come home, and that highly compressed adventure, which had some moments in it where you sort of feared for your well-being, but you got through it all, and then you come out of that and you come back to home and back to real life, which is a relationship, a job, and the surreal experience of what did I just go through? I just saw this people hanging on to the edge of life by their fingertips, and here we are back in this, and there's this, you get this perception of gluttony or greed or excess. And it was, you sat there for a while asking the question of which part's right, which part's wrong, am I taking this for granted? So it was for me, it was a confronting piece of, what do I stand for?
Yeah, identity. Who am I? What's my identity? What's my purpose, right?
Yeah, and therefore, that classic line, I think, therefore I am. So what is it? And for me, it was a real struggle for the next period, because I was back with my partner, which that relationship came to an end within about a year of that, because they were living such a different experience to what I'd had, and I really struggled to put myself back into the New Zealand framework after what I'd seen. So, it was interesting. It sort of brought me closer to an underlying sense of core purpose that I have, which is contribution to others. So being in that space, I think really spoke to the things that were important to me about trying to help my fellow being. And then you got back to this world where actually that wasn't a priority for most. Actually, the priority was getting their next thing. So it was a struggle just around how do you contribute to the right outcomes. So it was good. We joked earlier about humanity is about discomfort, because that's what creates progress. So it did that, and I did it in the luxury of a really nice environment. So it wasn't a hardship, but internally it definitely was a daily challenge of what choices do I make and how do I choose to exist. So, and it doesn't stop. You just try and get a better sense of it.
I want to ask around how long that, sort of you've gone through I'll call it a period of grieving, or even just, questioning your identity and purpose. How long did it take you, do you think, before you moved to try and, move towards living those purpose and values?
I think they were underlying traits of mine, and maybe I just drifted away from them a wee bit. So it was almost a call back to home base, but it was confusing. I think that first 12 months out was challenging, and I've got I don't necessarily share too much. I'm pretty private with stuff, but in the spirit of this conversation, I acted poorly. I didn't honour the relationship in terms of respecting my partner in where she was. I sort of internalized a lot and made it about me, so it made that really difficult, and it wasn't a great outcome for her or necessarily for me, but it was an outcome, and therefore it was the right thing. So I don't look back on that and say, woe is me. I just go, well, that was, if nothing else, that pressure of a situation creates outcomes that probably should happen anyway. So, but I probably also used a little bit of that experience as an excuse for some of my behaviour, which wasn't in hindsight appropriate. I think at all times you've got this internal measure that says always act with integrity, honesty, the front page test. If a photo was taken of you of any moment and it was put on the front page of a newspaper, how would you feel? And more importantly, 20 years later, how would you explain it to your kids? So I didn't do anything ridiculously bad, but it probably wasn't living my core truth. So 12 months was probably pretty challenging. I sort of ventured into a different way of life, and then pulled myself back, locked myself into sort of the pursuit of Ironman, which was a focus, physical, mental activity, as well as work, and that sort of put me back on a line of clarity. But in the background, you still have that residual. Are we there yet? Have I been true to what I learnt from that experience? And I suppose the question that it drives, and I mentioned this in one of our, when we had one of our sessions, I think Philip Roth was talking about his experience in Ukraine. The piece that sits with me is just that constant question of, is this it? And could we do this better? And it's a bloody annoying question, because the answer's never yes. There's always an opportunity for improvement, which is also a good thing, because it keeps you focused on, what next? What's that incremental step I need to take? But some days it can be unwinding. It can create a little bit of darkness.
What's the approach you take to, the teams that you run, and I suppose also other adventures now? Is it really that those two questions?
I'm mindful. I had a friend from years back who climbed Everest. We did a lot of climbing together, and that was on our bucket list. He achieved it. I didn't. And I watched him come out of that, and he went through this, difficult time. And the reality was, he got told, make sure you've got the next adventure mapped out before you finish the current one, so you've always got something to look forward to. So I think that's one thing that I try and do, is I try and make sure that I've always got that next thing. And it's not about filling a book. It's just about making sure that you've always got this positive drag. So that's part of it. The other part is, as I said earlier in our conversation, was just around the art of gratefulness, and just really reflecting on the good parts, because it's really easy not to. But when you look around you and see what your family's doing, and see what your friends are doing, and see what your business is doing, and what other people are achieving, you've got to take some time to just go, shit, that's pretty cool. And I'm fortunate within my work, I've got a business partner that's pretty clever, does some pretty phenomenal stuff. And I'm surrounded by a team of people that just surprise me every day. They just do incredible stuff. And it's really easy to probably think that we're on a downward spiral of interest and pursuit and awareness around what's necessary to keep this world going. And I just see some of our young teams in that just do phenomenal stuff that I never would have thought of or been able to do at that age. So I think generationally, I think the next one just gets better.
Well, that's a really positive way to wrap that up, mate. It's not often we hear that, but there's hope for the future.
Look, I'm lucky. I've got a wife that's constantly telling me, don't be that generation that sits here going, in my day. She's always going saying, look, just every generation's got Muppets. But just look at that group that are doing great things and take confidence in it. And I'm fortunate in our business, Fabrum, that we've just got incredible people. Like I'm confident that the world is going to be a better place just through their involvement. So that part's inspiring. So you got to focus on the right stuff.
Cool. 2 final questions. How's the back?
Look, as I mentioned earlier, I've got a history now of letting my ambition exceed my ability. So it wasn't the first injury, and it definitely hasn't been the last. So it pales into insignificance. I think I've done my back about 3 times now, amidst other bits of my body. So I'm a slow learner. It's great. I spent 6 days in the mountains a week ago. So I still managed to do that. I've got to go in for the physio every so often to get it rebuilt, but it's still there. It's still going well.
Good. And what's the next adventure?
The small one is a mate and I are doing the Rootburn Classic, which is a run down on the Rootburn track, which I think is one of the most stunning tracks of New Zealand. Last year, I tried to knock off all of the great walks of New Zealand. I tried to run them all, and I managed to get all of them bar 2 before I ran out of juice. So I've got to knock those off. But this year, I'm actually going to get to do a bit of a celebration of one of my youngest daughter's 21st in Italy in end of May. So not quite as adventurous as some of the other pursuits, but a chance to just spend some time with the team, the family, and really enjoy them. So looking forward to that.
Oh, I'm very jealous of that. Any Europe in summertime, and certainly that May time, that was the best time for traveling. Oh, mate, you'll enjoy that. Well, look,
I will.
Thank you so much for the yarn today. A really, really interesting journey. I'm sure you've got many more yarns, but thank you very much for making the time.
Thanks, Matthew. I've appreciated the chance to chat.